I just want to remind you that today is the third Sunday of the month, and so as usual we have an extended homily and a discussion afterwards, so get your thinking caps on and start formulating your ideas. So I've changed the second reading as a result of a very powerful dream I had on Tuesday night, and so I wrote an essay on Wednesday morning early when I got up, and I called it Having the Time of Your Life at the Speed of Love. I'm a heretic, theologically and scientifically. For instance, I don't agree with science when it says that nothing travels faster than light, even though 180,000 miles per second is pretty darn impressive. Speed is distance divided by time, so if I drive 100 miles in 2 hours, I'm traveling at 50 miles an hour. I want to look then at the notion of time. Time comes in two flavors. Let me call them extracranial time and intracranial time. The former is what most people, including scientists, mean by time. It happens outside the head, and it plods along from the past through the present and into the future. We call it chronology, and your watch, iPad, iPod, iPhone, computer, stove, radio, TV, and 100 other devices constantly push it in your face. But this kind of time is completely dependent upon space. If it's 2 p.m. in Healdsburg, it's not 2 p.m. in Cork City, rather it's 10 p.m. And this kind of time passes at different speeds. Space travelers, if they go fast enough, come back younger than us couch potatoes who barely ever even reach Mach 1. Now, intracranial time is very different. It happens inside the head. It takes the brain 25 nanoseconds, that's 1/40th of a second, to form a thought, no matter what the thought is. So I can think about my dinner last night or the Battle of Kinsale in 1601 in the same amount of time, 25 nanoseconds. Likewise, I can think about my front door or about the planet Neptune in just 25 nanoseconds. Hence, intracranial time is independent of both extracranial time and of space. So it's outside the constraints of the space-time cosmos. I can think about the Big Bang, which happened almost 14 billion years ago in extracranial time, and about the edge of the expanding universe, which is almost 14 billion light years distance in 25 nanoseconds. If you pardon the math, that means that thought can travel at the speed of 186,000 multiplied by 5,280, multiplied by 3,600, multiplied by 24, multiplied by 365, multiplied by 14 billion, multiplied by 40 feet per second. Einstein, eat your heart out. But here's the kicker. Love travels even faster because it's already there. It doesn't have to go in order to get there. Love, in fact, is independent both of extracranial time and intracranial time. Moreover, it is independent of Newton's laws and Einstein's relativity. It resides always in the here and always in the now. Love puts the is into isness. Over the last 3,000 years, planet Earth has thrown up some extraordinary geniuses. When you look at, for instance, art, you got the Michelangelos and the Leonardo da Vinci's. Or you think about music and you look at Mozart or Beethoven. Or you look at mathematics and you look at Leibniz and Descartes. Or you look at science and you look at Newton and Einstein. Or you look at psychology and you see Carl Jung and Sigmund Freud. Or you look at theology and you find Augustine and Thomas Aquinas. Or you look at philosophy and you look at Socrates and Plato. Extraordinary geniuses. And they all have their own special kind of interests. The artists and the musicians are interested in the meaning of beauty. And the mathematicians and the scientists are interested in the meaning of matter. And the psychologists are interested in the meaning of mind. And the theologians and the philosophers are interested in the meaning of life. And of all the disciplines, it seems to me that the field that's interested in the meaning of life is the most important of all the fields. And so I'm going to try blunder into that field this morning on the heels of Socrates and Plato, Aquinas and Augustine, and Monty Python. And I'm going to wrestle with the notion of the meaning of life. And I'm going to propose kind of six models of the meaning of life. And go through them fairly quickly. So the first one I'm going to look at, the notion that life begins at conception and ends at death. And the second notion that life begins at conception, but then it goes on for infinitely afterwards. And then I want to look at the notion that life is infinite in both directions, in the past and into the future. Then I want to look at the notion of time recycling itself in reincarnation. And then I want to examine the notion that you are your own grandparent. Yeah, there was a song. Do you remember the song? I get you to sing it. I am my own grandpa. Remember? Okay, I am my own grandpa. And then finally, I'm going to look at the notion that says you live parallel, simultaneous lives. So there are the 6 kind of points I'm going to make quickly this morning. Good morning, Matunde. Good morning, Donda. You're welcome, guys. So let me start with the notion that this model that suggests to us that life begins at conception and it ends at death. This is the notion of the notion of reductionistic, materialistic science, that consciousness in some senses is just an epiphenomenon of brain, and that only stuff that's can be tactile, that you can touch or see or taste or smell with your sensorium or by extension through your instrumentation, only that stuff is real. And it's a very neat system, it's very simple, and it's very silly. So in this model, God is just kind of a holdover from the infancy of our thinking. And in this model, as evidenced, for instance, by a guy called Richard Dawkins, a biologist, we're just basically taxis for the selfish gene. And so these selfish genes fashioned us at conception, and they abandon us at death. But unlike any other kind of taxi cab, it's the driver that pays the fare. And so you and I pay the fare for being the taxis to these genes by the anxiety we go through and the depression we experience and all the hard work we have to do. And then we get abandoned when they're finished with us and they move on and they reproduce someplace else. So this notion that we're basically taxi cabs for the selfish gene. This is what it looks like. And God is totally irrelevant in this model. But when you look at this model, it is totally simplistic. You go to the queen of all the sciences is pure mathematics. And all the sciences are based on mathematics and statistics. All experimentation has to take place with the formulas of mathematics and statistical analysis. And mathematics itself, when I was studying math in college, it was based on what were called the Peano postulates. And there were 9 postulates created by a very famous Italian mathematician in the 1800s. But basically, you have to take something on belief. You have to believe something. You have to make an act of faith in order to do math. So there was a very famous Hungarian mathematician in the 1931 called Kurt Gödel, who came up with what he called the incompleteness theorems. And he demonstrated, foolproofly, that any axiomatic system of mathematics it can be complete or it can be consistent, but it cannot be both. It can be complete but not consistent, or it can be consistent but not complete. In other words, to do pure math, you need to take at least one article on faith. You can't do math until you accept at least one postulate which cannot be proven. If you start with only one postulate, you can build a more consistent model, but you build very, very slowly. If you start with the Peano postulates, which are 9, you can build more quickly, but it is less consistent. But he demonstrated, and it's not just that we're not bright enough, it's the nature of reality, that you cannot start anywhere without making an act of faith in something. And we get the same thing in quantum physics with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. The observer, affects what's being observed. You can't simultaneously know the position and momentum of a subatomic particle. And so this model, shoots itself in the foot, because all the sciences are built upon mathematics, and mathematics and logic themselves have to be taken on faith in order to demonstrate some kind of proof. So that first model doesn't work at all for me. This model suggests everything ends at death. So the second model then suggests that life begins at conception, but it goes on infinitely into the future. Now, this is the model adopted by most of the Western religions, that somehow life begins at conception and it goes down into infinity. It's like, to use a mathematical model again, it's like the positive integers. There's a 0 and then 1, and then you can count off into infinity. You can't get to the end of it. So the positive integers are only infinite in one direction, but they have a beginning point, but they have no end point. And so there's this notion somehow that God is sitting up there on his throne watching life on planet Earth. And he's particularly interested in couples who are making love. And he's watching very, very carefully. And he's got a whole bevy of souls ready to go. And he's looking down and he's watching a sperm swimming its way towards an egg. And he says, "Number 9 said Joseph Park Mayfield, go, go, go." And then the soul comes down really, really quickly and takes up occupancy in the brand new zygote. And that's the beginning of life. So God is there with either creating souls on the spot, or he's got a whole bunch of them ready to go, and he gives orders. He's looking over his shoulder. Wherever there's a couple making love, make sure there's a soul ready to occupy the zygote. So you're really, really, really busy guy. And then we go through life, and we die, but we don't end there. We're subjected, if you're part of the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, trinity of religions, then there's two kinds of judgments that follow on death. There's a kind of particular judgment, and then there's the general judgment. One is like going to county jail, and the other is like going to the federal penitentiary. And so at the end of a particular lifetime, according to these three systems, there's a judgment, and you're going to get the thumbs up or the thumbs down, as a result of what happened. And then you'll be put in a holding cell, a kind of county jail, until the whole thing is finished. And then we're all dragged out into this huge big field, and there's a general judgment. And God is sitting up in a dais with a microphone. There's loudspeakers all over the room. And we get dragged up one by one, and we get interrogated, and we're totally shamed. Meanwhile, everybody's waiting around. So there's been like 111 billion of us have lived over the last 40,000 years since Homo sapiens arrived. There's going to be a lot of people waiting in the field. And there's going to be a need for a lot of porta potties. And I'm sure there'll be people, selling food, burritos to go or whatever. Yeah. And so at the end of that, we're going to get the thumbs up or the thumbs down forever and ever amen. And then God folds up the game, and kind of that's the end of it. And that's a model that, mainstream Christian, Islamic, and Jewish religions have propagated over the years. So that's another model. A third model is that life has no beginning and has no end. So this is like all of the integers, the negative integers and the positive integers. So they go off into negative infinity and they go off into positive infinity. So there was no beginning to them way over here, and there's no end to them over on this side. And that's more like the kind of the Eastern models of religion, that souls are eternal entities that don't have beginning and they don't have end, that they're outside of time. And in this sense, this is the place that the mystics tend to go to. Because eternity is not a long time. It's not actually adding the positive integers to the negative integers and then getting all the integers. It's not like that. You step outside of time completely. So eternity is not a long period of time. Eternity is no time. It is timelessness. And that's the place that the mystics tell us, that's where, God is, or God can be experienced, outside of time completely. And this is a little bit what I was trying to write about in this essay that I wrote on Wednesday. So in this model, there's no end to the process, and there's no beginning to the process. There's just the eternal now in which God resides. There's a fourth model then, which is the one that really fascinates me, and it's the model of time recycling, or reincarnation. This notion, that we go round and round many times. And so we sometimes think that this is some kind of a weird, esoteric New Age phenomenon, our belief system. And the truth is, it's been with us throughout all of human history. The Celtic peoples believed in reincarnation. The Kalenjin peoples, among whom I worked in Kenya, believed in reincarnation. Hinduism did, Buddhism did. The esoteric or mystical wings of both Christianity, Islam, and Judaism all subscribe to reincarnation. Hinduism has this great model that there are kind of 4 phases to the reincarnational kind of trajectory. And the first phase is that souls are fascinated with sensuality. We're interested in good food or good wine, or good sex. And Hinduism says there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. We'll teach you how to do these things well. But there's more to life than just sensuality. And so the whole second block becomes, an interest in power, privilege, and prestige. We're into power over very, very often. And Hinduism says again, and if you exercise that with justice, there's nothing wrong with that. But there's a lot more to life than just power or prestige or privilege. So this whole third block is service of others. The notion of compassion and reaching out to other people. But that's not the end of the journey as far as Hinduism is concerned, because that's predicated on the notion of otherness, that there's me and there's not me. And so that notion is erroneous in itself, but it's a very important stage. And the fourth stage is what they call moksha. And moksha is liberation from the notion of individual self or separation from God, from source, or from other. So you step yourself through these four phases. So that's the model of reincarnation that Hindu subscribes to. It's fascinating to me that, Jesus himself teaches about reincarnation, but you don't hear a whole lot about that, in the Christian churches. So there's two passages I want to mention. One is in John's Gospel in chapter 9, and the other is in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 17. And in John's Gospel, chapter 9, there's a story where Jesus is leaving the city of Jericho with his disciples. And there's a blind man sitting outside the gates, and he's well known. This man has been blind since birth, and he's been begging all his life. Everybody knows him. And as he's walking out, one of the disciples noticed the blind man and asked Jesus a question, a theological question. Because according to Judaism, God punishes the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. So they asked Jesus, who sinned? Was it this man, or was it his parents, because he was born blind? Now, that question doesn't make any sense if you don't subscribe to reincarnation. How could a man be born blind for his own sins? But so the truth is that esoteric Judaism believed in a form of reincarnation, and Jesus taught it. There's a story in the Gospel of Matthew in chapter 17 where Jesus and three of his disciples, Peter, James, and John, are on top of Mount Tabor, and they have this extraordinary transfiguration where Jesus glows literally just brilliantly white, and there's a vision of Moses and Elijah speaking with him. Now, Moses had died 1,200 years before Jesus, and Elijah had died 800 years before Jesus. But actually, Elijah had never died. He had been taken up to heaven in a fiery chariot. And so according to the prophets, there was a prophet called Malachi who in 455 BC prophesied that Elijah would have to come back before the Messiah would come. And so the disciples on the way down the mountain, having had this extraordinary vision, they say to Jesus, why do the scriptures say that Elijah has to come back before the Messiah arrives? And Christ's response was, Elijah has already come back, but they treated him just as they wanted. And then Matthew adds in parentheses, here Jesus was talking about John the Baptist. So according to the teaching of Jesus, John the Baptist is the reincarnation of Elijah. So you get Jesus teaching reincarnation. Now for me, when I finally came to understand and have experiences myself, reincarnational experiences, it cleared up a whole bunch of psychological and theological issues for me, particularly around questions of justice. It never made any sense to me that, for instance, let's say a little 3-month-old baby born in East Palo Alto who dies in a drive-by shooting accidentally, that was life for this little kid. 3 months and God said, that's it, that was life, you're done. Or that, so this kid then goes straight to heaven without ever having been tested. And you say, well, God knew what he was going to be like, so he didn't need to test him. He knew he was going to be a good person until he went straight up to heaven. That doesn't seem very fair. So there's some poor Catholic man, pre-Vatican II, and he's really hungry, and his wife is out shopping somewhere. It's a Friday, he's really, really hungry, and he finds a sausage in the fridge, and there's no other food in the house. And he's starving, but it's a Friday, but he eats the sausage. And then he suddenly realizes what he's doing, and he runs out to go to confession, and he gets killed by a double-decker bus. And now he gets the thumbs down. He's going to go to hell because he committed a mortal sin. Does feel good to you? Or you look at the Catholic teaching that no matter how good a person was, a Hindu sage, or a Buddhist avatar, if they didn't believe in the Lord Jesus, they were going to get the thumbs down and go to hell. Now, how do you explain that kind of stuff? Or how do you explain the teaching of a guy like Calvin, this really crazy character in the 1600s, who taught a form of predestination that said the following. It's not just that God creates souls, he gives us opportunities to live our life, and then if we live well, we go to heaven. If we live badly, we go to hell. But rather, that God has pre-selected people to go to heaven. And he knows from the moment that they're created that these are going to go to heaven. And you actually find this in Paul's writings, unless you understand it really well. But Calvin went on and said, God creates souls who are actually predestined to go to hell. It's not that they go to hell by default, but he actually creates souls whose future means going to hell. Why would God create souls and then roast them for all eternity? What kind of a God does that believe in? So for me, the notion of reincarnation made a lot more sense. That there is justice in the world. And the justice consists in karma, not a punitive mechanism whereby we are punished in subsequent lifetimes for sins of previous lifetimes, but rather a learning opportunity where God gives us as many opportunities as we need in as many configurations of life, in both genders, in all ethnicities, all socioeconomic status, in order to determine whether or not I have the ability to love in all circumstances and in all configurations. It's like a parent, wanting a child to grow and to learn. So for me, the notion of reincarnation cleared up a whole bunch of psychological and sociological, and particularly this question in theology, which is the oldest conundrum in theology, called theodicy. The kind of problem about why do bad things happen to good people. And it clears up all of those problems for me. This brings me to the fifth one. You are your own grandpa. Can Lisa or Laurie, can you sing it? Do you remember the line? How does it go?
You're the second cousin twice removed from the mother of the brother.
Yeah.
I am my own grandpa.
Right. It's a brilliant song, actually. It goes through a whole bunch of, extramarital affairs, inbreeding, incestuous relationships, social contracts, and it winds up proving that you're actually your own grandfather. And that's the punchline. I am my own grandpa. But the truth is you are. You're your own grandma and your own grandpa. And let me explain it to you. The you that's sitting in the pew right now, you are the descendant of the you that walked in the door half an hour ago. You created the you that's there now by everything you've done in the last half an hour since you came in. By the way you're sitting, by what you're thinking, by what you're planning to do. You're creating who you are right now on the basis of the person that walked in the door half an hour ago. And in 4 or 5 hours' time, when I'm finished talking and you walk out, you're birthing who you're going to be in the future by what you're doing in the present. So literally, you are the descendant of your ancestor self, and you're the ancestor of your descendant self. You literally are, even in this one day. But it's even more importantly true when you expand it over many lifetimes. This lifetime you is the child of the previous lifetimes you. Because your personality today is the net result of all of the experiences that you've generated over all of the lifetimes that you've lived. So you've literally created yourself. You have birthed yourself. You are your own grandma and your own grandpa. And the lifetime you will live in your next incarnation is the result of your thoughts and your actions and your behavior and your words in this lifetime. So you're birthing the next version of yourself. So you're the grandchild of your previous lifetimes, and you're the grandparent of your lifetimes yet to come. So you continue to generate that. So your thoughts and your words and your deeds create who you are and who you will become. So there's a great adage in Hinduism that says, sow a thought and reap an act. Sow an act and reap a habit. Sow a habit and reap a destiny. And in some senses, you are the destiny created by all the thoughts you previously had. And who you will be in the future is the destiny created by how you behave in the present moment. And so literally, you are creating who you are. So that's the theory of life that suggests you're your own parent, grandparent, child, and grandchild. So when Jesus says, you shall be held accountable for every idle word, he wasn't talking about God as some kind of a cosmic CPA who's keeping a record. He's not talking about that. He's saying you're creating your own future by what you're thinking right now. If your thoughts are thoughts of love and compassion, that is who you become. If your thoughts are thoughts of anger or anxiety or prejudice, that is who you become. So your destiny is literally in your own hands. And your present moment is the result of the decisions, the thoughts, the words, and the actions of your previous self. Which brings me to my final point, the sixth model. You live parallel, simultaneous lives. So the soul itself, I believe, is absolutely infinite. It's a bite-sized piece of God. And when you take a chunk out of infinity, the chunk is infinite. We live in a holographic, fractal world. So in a hologram, no matter how small a piece you take from the original, if you shine a laser light on it, you recreate the totality of the original. And fractal geometry is the same thing. It's just the same pattern at different scales in infinite numbers of scales. So you are like, the soul is like that. So you can take any two rational numbers. Take, say, a quarter and a seventh. So that's a little tiny chunk of the rational numbers. There's an infinite number of other rational numbers in between those two. And you take any two of those, there's an infinite number of rational numbers in between those two. And so no matter how many ways you break up God into souls, every soul is infinite. And so I'm convinced that souls have the ability to live parallel, simultaneous lifetimes. Now, I remember watching a great movie years and years ago called The Nutty Professor. And did you guys see that? The Nutty Professor, yeah. Eddie Murphy. And there's one hilarious scene. Eddie Murphy plays himself, the Nutty Professor, and he plays his own grandfather, and he plays his own grandmother. And they're sitting around the table having a meal. It is absolutely hilarious. And he's dressed up differently. Obviously, it's trick photography as well. But he's playing all three parts, and he's doing it absolutely brilliantly. Now, you're a more talented actor than Eddie Murphy. Because every night, you do that in spades. You put your head in the pillow, and within half an hour, you create, a whole group of epics that Steven Spielberg will give his eye teeth out to have been able to produce. You're the director of these dreams. You're the producer of them. You fashion the costumes. You choose the locations. You script it. You develop the plot. And you play all the characters in this drama. But to make it interesting for yourself, you pretend like you're only one of the characters. And you're amazed at what the other people are doing around you. But the truth is, you're playing all the characters. It is your dream ego that's creating this extraordinary drama. And not only do you do it once during the night, you do 5 or 6 blockbusters over the course of the night. So you're much more talented than Eddie Murphy is, because you're playing all these parts constantly. And so what is life about? Life is a dream that the ego is having. And the ego is a dream that the soul is having. And the soul is a dream that spirit is having. And spirit is a dream that source is having. So we're nested dreams. We're characters in God's dream. God is playing all the parts. God has chosen the locations, the costumes, the script, the dialogue. And God is playing all the parts. And every single one of us is a part that God is playing. But God pretends like we're all different. And we believe it. We all think we're different. And we're not. We're just aspects of God interacting with each other in order to try to produce love. So God is that force that invests love into manifestation. So what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is God is having fun. Right, guys? Fire. Okay, like me. Yes. Johanna, do you want to grab a microphone? Johanna's up here.
I've actually, myself and at least one other person that I know, and then you have had some unusual dream experiences this week. And I don't know if you can guess or think about why there are periods of time where our, it's like something coming through our planet maybe, or something like that. And then the other thing is I know you've told us before, but I don't remember when. I think the Jewish religion dealt with the idea of karma. When did it get eliminated from the Catholic religion? Because I think it was there.
Karma or reincarnation?
I'm sorry, reincarnation. I'm sorry, yeah.
Okay, great. Two great questions. So the first part of your question is, is there something special about this time that there seems to be kind of an infusion of different energies or different insights? I really believe there is. I think that we're on the edge of what I call Christ consciousness. that many, many times in the history of planet Earth, there have been these significant shifts. We went from just single-cell creatures 3.7 billion years ago to multicellular organisms, to the great sea monsters, to the amphibians who crawled out onto land, to the great reptiles like the dinosaurs, to the mammals, to the hominids, to Homo sapiens, to Homo sapiens sapiens, and now we're on the verge of what I believe is Homo spiritualis, a break into Christ consciousness or Buddha nature. And I see it happening all over the world. And I see it happening in all kinds of disciplines. And the fact that we're aware that there's so much turmoil and chaos is actually a proof of that. Because nature never makes a significant shift in consciousness which is not precipitated by some kind of chaos. And I see that in personal lives, I see it in relationships, I see it in planetary evolution, I see it in cosmic development. So certainly the turmoil we're experiencing and the chaos we're experiencing is both evidence for and an invitation to make that shift as individuals into Christ consciousness. So I really believe that even our DNA is being retooled in order to accommodate that level of consciousness. And that's the reason why these kinds of visionary experiences, a lot of people are having these right now. Your second question about the notion of karma, and when did it get thrown out of the Catholic Church? Reincarnation, at least. Reincarnation was accepted belief in the Catholic system until the Second Council of Constantinople, which was in the year, I believe, 565. And it got thrown out just parenthetically, not directly. There was a big discussion at that council about a church father, an earlier church father called Origen, Origen. He was one of the great church fathers in the 3rd century. But in the Second Council of Constantinople, they anathematized his teachings. So they threw all his books out, all his books were banned and thrown out. And he was one of the big teachers of reincarnation. So it was like they threw the baby out with the bathwater. They didn't discuss reincarnation per se and anathematize it. It got thrown out with all the other stuff. But it continued to sneak in because the notion of purgatory is simply a very thinly disguised Catholic notion of reincarnation. So what is purgatory? Purgatory is a kind of a temporary state of purification before we're fully ready for heaven. What is that? That's reincarnation. That's karma. It means that there's the opportunity to continue to purify the self until we get fully enlightened. So you're just using different language. Instead of heaven, use the word enlightenment, and instead of reincarnation, use the word purgatory, and it's the very same basic idea. That literally, before we're at the same kind of resonance with God, we have to burn off all the sense of separation from each other, from nature, and from source. And however many lifetimes that takes, that's how long we get. So it's still, literally, it's hiding, it's been smuggled into Catholic theology, in a Trojan horse called purgatory. Ingrid, did you see, you mentioned before Mass that you had a poem that you wanted to read? Yes. Do you want to go for it? Do you want to give us the context? Yeah. Should I just grab a mic?
Okay. Well, life is full of surprises, and some of the most interesting ones are when you surprise yourself. And here I am with a microphone, going to read a poem. My small family had a recent death. My very alive 84-year-old stepmother, Nina, was killed in a car accident. And being at the hospital, seeing her on life support at her deathbed vigil was a defining moment in my life. And I realized, any of us can be here today and gone tomorrow. Life is so precious, and our lives are precious. And we need to have courage to show up how we can and talk about what we care about. So I wanted to read this all-time favorite Christmas poem at the COJ party, but I just didn't have the courage. But life always gives us second opportunities when we need them, so I'm here now. First of all, I just want to share a few things I believe about the holiday season, that there is a sacredness at this time, that there's magic, there's blessings, and there's miracles. First off, I believe in the spirit of Santa Claus, that some jolly, benevolent, generous, giving life force comes to us and through us. I believe in the power of the winter solstice today, that our earth is reborn and we are reborn. And now, thanks to Seán, I believe in Christ consciousness, the unconditional love and grace and forgiveness we can receive and give anytime. So I want to read this poem, and it's called The Gift of Each Other. I believe that once a year, someone special comes to us, and something magical comes over us. For the best gifts don't come in boxes. They come without ribbons and bows, at no cost and much gain. During the holidays, we celebrate the gift of each other, quirks and all. For while gifts are nice, they can't call you or check in on you. They can't send you cards or notes or listen and understand. Add some levity, say just the right thing. Unlike those that do, like family members who are best friends, and best friends who feel like family, these are the people who make up the fabric of your life and who make your life. These gifts are never the wrong size or shape or color. They simply are. And while the holidays may come once a year, they do not. Because when all is said and done, it's just you and me. We're what counts. And whether we're aware of it or not, we come first for each other every day. In big ways, obvious ways, subtle ways, always. This is never more apparent than during the holidays, when a window inside opens somewhere and you see all that's good, that's right, that's yours. Because the old saying is true. Happiness isn't having what you want, it's wanting what you have. So I just want to say Christmas is a state of mind, and that we can create peace and goodwill every single day. And so I just wish everybody all the beauty of the season and the miracle and the magic and the blessings. Thank you.
Thanks a million, Ingrid. Thank you. Bill?
I had a couple of comments. One, I think there's a third reference to reincarnation in the Bible, and that is in my Father's house there are many mansions, and many people have interpreted that as being reincarnation content. And the other idea is in the circularity of lives, or simultaneity of living, there is a body of belief that says that you're living all the lives that you have ever lived, are living and ever will live, are being lived right now. And that there's a bleed through, and that at night when you sleep, if you're wrestling with a problem, you can get an answer from your 1800 life, or you can get an answer from your 2500 life as well. Thirdly, in definition of what is life, or how does life begin and end, the Christians say life begins with conception. The Hindus say life begins with breath. And the Jews say that life begins when your children grow up and leave the house.
Thank you, William. Great. Karen, did you want to? Great comments, Bill. Thanks a million.
It's just a question that came up during
We can't hear you. Wait till you get the mic.
So it's just a question that came up during Ingrid's poem.
Okay.
So there is an opening that occurs
Yes.
in this time of year, and I
Yeah.
wondered if you have any sense of what
Okay.
that is. Is it tied into the cosmic thing?
Yeah.
Is it
That's beautiful.
tied into the
Yeah.
solstice? What? It's so palpable.
Yeah. And so we have a phrase you've heard me use many, many times in my language, a ÓLaoire, thin place. And a thin place is a location where the energy is such that the veil between the transcendent and the physical, between the mystical and the mundane, is diaphanous, and you get to see through. You know, now children live in that space a lot, but there are physical locations all over the world where this is true. So we call them thin places. But in Gaelic, there's also the notion of thin times, that there are times on a cycle where there is literally a bleed through between the kind of the mystical and the mundane. But they're dangerous places. So in the Celtic calendar, there were 4 such occasions. The first one was the 1st of February, which we call Imbolc. The next one was the 1st of May, which we call Bealtaine. The next one was the 1st of August, which we call Lunasa. And the 4th one was the 1st of November, which we call Samhain. And at these times of the year in the Celtic imagination and experience, portals opened up, between the worlds. Now, we live in a multi-dimensional reality. But the truth is, our thinking confines us to just living in this physical space. But when we're open to it, there are certain times of the year when literally portals open up. Now, the thing is, you have to be really, really careful, because a portal is not a guaranteed entry into light. It is a connecting to other dimensions, and all kinds of entities or energies can come through. And so you have to go really, really carefully at these times of the year and in those places. And that's why, for instance, Moses is told in Exodus chapter 3, verse 17, take your shoes off. You're on sacred ground. You can't just blunder into a sacred space, any which way. And so the first notion of a taboo in religious thinking, was about protecting sacred spaces and sacred times, so that people didn't, blunder into these experiences and then have no way to contextualize them and get totally overpowered by them. They could either get inflated because they thought they were mystics, or they get kind of totally anxious because they meant some kind of demonic entities. And so the taboo was to make sure that people only had those kinds of experiences when they were prepared for them, or they were led by some kind of a guide who had previous experiences and knew what she was dealing with. So that was the notion of a taboo. So you get that then in many different calendars, that it's allied to what the sun is doing. So the equinoxes and the solstices are very, very important because of our connection with the sun during these times. And the Christian religion hijacked one of those. It hijacked the December winter solstice and pretended like Christ was born there. So they were doing that because Christ originally was thought to have been born in April. Way, way back, that was the idea. And then at some stage, it was January 6th, what's now the Epiphany. And then they moved it back to at the end of December to capture the solstice and to try to get the upper hand on Mithraism, which was a very strong religion in the Roman Empire at the time that Christianity became the state religion. And so, of course, we're cosmic beings, and every atom affects, our energy level. Every planet affects our energy level. And so this notion, for instance, of astronomy, people poo-poo astronomy. You can't just poo-poo it completely. We're influenced by the energies of all bodies. And it's not just a gravitational tug. I remember the year I spent in London, I decided to study astronomy just for the fun to see what it was like. And I remember getting a textbook, and the first page of the textbook, the flyleaf said, you're not who you are because you were born when you were born. Rather, you were born when you were born because you are who you are. So in other words, astronomy is not that you get born under a particular sign and yep, bingo, you're stuck with that. It's rather the soul signifies its mission and its intention by choosing to come in under a particular configuration of planetary alignments, because it sets up a dynamic, an energy grid, and you're choosing to come in order to signify the purpose you have. So all of these things have an influence, and certainly the sun does on planet Earth, and the moon does on planet Earth, but all the other planets as well. All the constellations, all of the galaxies, they're all acting together in a symphony, and every part of the symphony is influencing the experience of the other people. If you're playing the drums in an orchestra, you're being influenced by the guy who are playing the violins. And so whether you're consciously aware of it or not, the entire system is in harmonics, and they're all influencing us. And when particular members of the orchestra, go into a particular kind of mode, where they're, in some sense, they're extending or extenuating, their playing, it affects everybody else in the orchestra. So we're literally fractals, all the ways up from, electrons that orbit the nucleus, up to planets which are orbited by moons, to solar systems which have planets going around them, to galaxies with solar systems swirling around them, to the center of the universe with galaxies swirling around. It's fractals and holograms all the ways up, and all these energies interact with each other. And so it calls for us that we be aware of that, and we be respectful of it, and we fall in love with it, and realize that we're all players in the symphony being conducted by God. Lorraine.
It's interesting what we're talking
Do you want to grab the microphone up? Yeah.
all of the different layers that we exist in.
Right.
2 nights ago, excuse me, I had a really interesting experience. I was between dream and waking, and I found myself out of body.
Brilliant.
And there was an astral being there. I didn't have a visual sense. It was one of the ones that manifest through feeling.
Yes.
and boundaries and touch.
Okay.
And it was benevolent.
Great.
And I was sort of going, get out of here, get out of here. I
okay.
just wanted my space.
Okay.
And then when I had awakened, I realized that the being was, I don't know if this is the right way to say it, it was myself. It was a split off part of myself,
Right.
and I've never
Right.
encountered one
That's
on
brilliant.
that level, and I've been trying to process it.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. So it goes back to something that Bill was saying, and that I've thought about many times myself, that we are indeed living in simultaneous incarnations, that time is an artifact of human consciousness. Because we got such a tiny little laptop between our ears, we have to break up the gestalt into bite-sized pieces and process them sequentially. But the truth is, we live in the eternal now. So all of these experiences are happening simultaneously, and they're bleeding into each other. And indeed, in your dream life, you're encountering either past incarnations of the self or present simultaneous incarnations of yourself. They're all happening at the same time. You're multitasking always, except that most of the time we're not aware of the other tasks we're performing. I've used the example with you many times, so let me reiterate it. How could we be existing in parallel lives simultaneously and not be aware of it? What's the purpose of it? And the example I've used is this. If I were to put on, let's say, a Seán Penn day in the movie theaters of the Bay Area, I think he's a fabulous actor. And I make an agreement with the owners of all the cinemas in the Bay Area that each of them, beginning at 10 o'clock on Sunday morning, they're going to show a movie of Seán Penn, in which Seán Penn is the actor. But it's going to be a different movie in each theater. Now, just two movies come to mind. There's one called Dead Man Walking, you know that one, where he's a killer, a cold-blooded killer who killed a couple. And he gives a brilliant performance in it. There's another one where it's called, I think it's called I Am Sam, where he's a mentally retarded adult raising a little girl. And they're totally different kinds of characters. Now, as Sam in that movie, he has no notion whatsoever, as Sam, of the killer in the other movie. He has no idea whatsoever. But Seán Penn, the actor, is aware that he's played all those roles, and that right now all those are being shown in the Bay Area. So as a soul, he is totally aware of all the roles he's playing in all the cinemas in the Bay Area. But as the individual characters, he has no notion of that. Now that's for us. We're living all these simultaneous lifetimes, and the soul is aware of those and is harvesting the results of all those experiences. But the individual characters, the egos in each one of these dramas is totally unaware of the other characters we're playing in the other dramas. But then occasionally there is a bleed through. Deja vu experiences are a bleed through. And dreams at night are a bleed through. And I believe that the experience you're describing, Lorraine, was you're meeting another level of yourself. Living in a different incarnation, and the ego of you, felt like it was intrusion, but the soul of you soon realized it's just another part of the self. Yeah. So we're doing what God does. God self-fractures in order to generate experiences, and we self-fracture as souls in order to generate simultaneous experiences, to speed up the learning process. Laurie, you had your hand up.
I'm going to take the courage to do something. I always come in and write something before, and I was...
Put it right up to your mouth, love.
Okay, I always come in and write something before the sermon, and I'm just going to share it because I celebrate the solstice.
Fabulous.
And I had written before you started, look to the stars, look to the light. In the dark of night, the veil is thin, let the magic begin. And then I think of a song I can remember from celebrating, which is, there is no end to the circle, no end. There is no end to life, there is no end. And it just continues over and over. Right? And it just touched my heart, and I wanted the courage to share.
Good for you, Laurie. Good for you, Pet. Thank you. Thank you, Pet. Sharon?
Now, does this tie in with the...
Put up close, Sharon.
Does this tie in with the concept of quantum jumping, which is going into meditation and pulling skills that you had in other lives into this life and manifesting amazing things.
Right.
There are people who are teaching this and that have great success with it. I've never tried it, but it sounds fascinating. And others say, what's the point of that? You should be living here now and forget about all your other lives.
Okay.
But that's a contradiction because there is no. They are all together.
Okay.
But we're just not aware of them, which could blow our little minds away if we were terribly aware of them in normal consciousness.
Right. Great question, Sharon. So telling somebody that your past lives are unimportant, just get on with the present, is the equivalent of telling a 6-year-old child that the first 5 years of your life didn't matter, The truth is, the 6-year-old child is a product of the first 5 years of life. Every experience they've had has created the temperament and the personality they now have. So of course it's important. But if you continue to live in the past, you're going to be filled either with anxiety or with anger. So you have to take all the learnings of the past, and incarnate them and embed them and embody them in the present moment. So the trick is not to abandon the past. The trick is to embody the past in the present. In the same way that when a tree is growing, in order to produce branches and leaves and flowers, it does not abandon its root system. If it were to abandon its root system, it would die. But it's not focused on the root system. Every part of it is important. It's reaching towards the heavens, but it's drawing upon the nutrients in the soil. And the soil on which you draw is the earlier years of this life and the earlier lives of incarnation. And to go to your first point, the universe is like an indulgent grandmother who videotapes everything her grandchildren are doing. And Hinduism calls that the Akashic records. So literally, everything that's ever been experienced in any dimension has been recorded by this doting grandparent. And if you know where grandma keeps the videotapes, you can go there, plug them into your VHS and look at it. And so that's part of the spiritual journey. It is the ability to access the Akashic records. I mentioned the story this morning of Jesus having an experience of Moses and Elijah. Moses is dead 1,200 years. Elijah is dead 800 years. Jesus is somehow able to plug into the Akashic records and take out the CDs and plug them into his computer and watch them and do it so powerfully that the other 3 guys can see them as well. So that's the ability to plug in. All the data are there. Nothing is lost, ever. And so the question is, can I avail of it in order to kind of align myself more and more fully? And when I plug into the Akashic records, a few things happen. The first thing is I have much more information and much more resources for the now. And also come to the realization that it is a field in which we're all embedded. And therefore the notion of separate identity is an illusion. We are not separate from each other. We're different. We're simply different articulations of the same underlying pulse. There is a field out there of which all of us are just individual, eruptions, but the field is what's important. It is the ocean that's not important, not the particular waves it generates. The waves always go back into the ocean. The waves are consisted of the water, which is the stuff of the ocean. They're not, individual entities that continue to survive forever and ever, amen. They have to go back to the ocean because they're water. Yeah. Making it.
I'll start.
No, wait for the mic. Your voice is beautiful. We want to hear you. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go.
So the purgatory thing,
Yeah.
sort of, how can it be that the image of, if purgatory is actually reincarnation, how can it be that this image in Catholicism is actually like a holding state where you do nothing?
Okay.
You just wait and you're totally helpless, and your sins and all that get burned away. Now I know that this kind of corruption happens all the time, and what actually, but it just strikes me. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. It's a total weird idea. The truth of it is that this holding state, it's not that nothing is happening. In fairness to the Catholic Church, it tried to redeem the imbalance by creating what they call the communion of saints. So the communion of saints is the notion that there are 3 kind of sections to Christians. There's the church, what they call the church militant, which is us on planet Earth, fighting warriors of God. And then there's the church suffering, which is the guys in purgatory. And then there's the church triumphant, the guys who got to heaven. But according to this doctrine, we can all plead on each other's behalf. And so the people in heaven are pleading for the guys in purgatory and for us. And we here, through plenary indulgences or prayers or whatever, we can affect the outcome for the guys in purgatory. So it's a kind of a recognition of the fact that the entire system is interconnected. And while these are really artificial categories of distinction and alienation, there's an underlying truth that no matter what configuration or what state you find yourself in, you're embedded in a web of neuronal connections. And prayer is the kind of the electromagnetic, is the bioelectrical energy that connects the neurons. Prayer is the greatest, internet connection of all time. It connects all the computers. And so purgatory is just a very sloppy attempt to talk about the fact that there's an ongoing alignment, an ongoing self-realization that leads finally to enlightenment. And in this process, we're all helping each other. And so, they're creating these artificial kinds of categories, but they're onto something, a deeper underlying truth, if you can get behind the images. Yeah. Lisa, and then Jean.
This gives me an image, which is of the DMV, which we stood in line and you waited and you waited and you waited. And what you were describing to me was like, is that purgatory? Is that hell on earth? I mean, that was that comparable kind of thing. And yet, the DMV now has a reservation system where you can speed your processing of things. So is prayer equivalent then in that sense from the image?
Yeah. It's a good image, but the truth is we think that prayer is some kind of mechanism whereby we kind of force God's hand to deliver our agenda, and that's not what it is at all. Prayer, properly understood, is about a relationship. Prayer is the conversation that exists between two lovers, and so that's what prayer really is about. And so, it's not just prayer petition where you're asking. Occasionally, you're going to ask your beloved for something. But mostly, you're going to kind of bathe in her presence or his presence. You just delight being together. Sometimes there's no conversation necessary. But that's still communion. That's still communication. You're communicating with your energies. You're communicating with your eyes. And so, real prayer is just bathing in God's presence. And but we've reduced it again to just a kind of a begging routine where we got an agenda, God has got the goodies, and now we can see if we can force God to deliver what we want. Yeah. Jean.
So, Seán, are you saying that, so the people who were born under these different signs, they chose those months to be born? Is that what you're saying?
Sorry.
And do you, first of all, so is astrology a sham? And then could you say something about numerology?
Okay.
Is it a sham?
Thanks for two simple questions, Jean. Yeah. So my real understanding of astrology is that astrology is not, the stuff you read on the newspaper every day, the Libra, you're going to meet something, a tall, dark, handsome, man today. That's rubbish. Astrology, properly understood, is the realization that literally the entire universe is interconnected, and that there are ways in which these interact with each other. Literally, and the law of physics. One of the basic laws of physics is gravity, and gravity says that the force of attraction between two heavenly bodies, you call one of them M1 and the other M2, the force of attraction between two heavenly bodies is M1 multiplied by M2 divided by R squared and multiplied by the gravitational constant. So even physically, all of the heavenly bodies interact with each other. Literally, atoms attract or repel each other, so there are literally forces between every element in the universe. Now, that's not just true at a physical level, it's also true at a metaphysical level, that the energies and the entities that inhabit or animate all these physical objects, those two are in relationship with each other. So my understanding of astrology is not that you're born on a certain day, tough luck, this is who you're going to become. But rather, as we come in, we're coming in with a particular alignment of energies in order to signify what particular mission I'm on. Now, the equivalent of it is like, there's a tribe in West Africa that has this great custom. When a woman is about 8 months pregnant, the elders sequester her, bring her into a hut, and they put her into a hypnotic trance. And they speak to the baby in utero. And they believe that the baby will use the mother's voice to answer. And they'll ask the baby 2 questions. And the 2 questions are, what is your name? How do you want to be known? And secondly, what is your mission? What are you coming to do? And the mother will answer those 2 questions. And when the baby is born, that is the name it will be given. And the entire tribe will support the child in that mission, the mission that the child outlined. So in some senses, that's a symbolic way of the group coming together to honor, the connection to the new life coming in. And the astrological signs, in a sense, are just another symbol. It's not that they define, and limit what can happen. It's that the child or the soul coming in is using a conjunction of energies, real energies, at a metaphysical and a physical level to indicate the kind of mission. So it's the child answering the question, what are you coming to do? Your second question about numerology, there are many, many, many different kinds of numerology. It's like any area. It's like, is science good or bad? Well, it depends whether is it creating drones and intercontinental ballistic missiles, or is it creating, great medicine for us? So it's how we use these things. So there's a system of numerology, for instance, in Judaism. It's called gematria. And gematria is a system of numerology where you assign a particular value to each letter of the Hebrew alphabet. There are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And then when you read the scriptures, and you're reading it through gematria, you're not so much interested in the storyline or even in the kind of the content of the passage. You're interested in the numerological value of the passage. So you add up the words and you look at the number you get to, and there's a hidden meaning inside in that. So there are levels of numerology which are really, really powerful. We're beginning to discover, for instance, in astronomy, as distinct from astrology, that when you look at the trajectories of just the planets in our solar system, and you watch how they behave, if you could force each planet to create a tracer, so that you can, when it's done several circuits, you can see where it's been. They create the most extraordinary shapes, really profound geometrical shapes, like roses or squares. They're not just going around in circles, relative to each other. So when you look at astronomy, and you trace it over a period of time, these extraordinary patterns, literally physical patterns, are being created. And so in that sense, there's patterns underlying everything. And I believe, in fact, that in some senses, if God is anything, God is a mathematician. Because literally, the laws of the physical universe are definitely responding to extraordinary mathematical laws. And there's some very sacred numbers that you find in mathematics, like the number 1.618. And you find that, a series of, what's the series, Lou? What's the Fibonacci series. So you start 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, where every subsequent number is the sum of the two numbers that came before it. And you look at that number that the guy called Fibonacci, a mathematician, I think he was Italian as well, discovered. And you look at nature, and it's constituted like that. The petals on a sunflower follow that pattern. The bones, the length of the bones in the human body follow this Fibonacci series. So they're a mathematical formula that literally underlie even the physical universe in which we find yourself. So if you're talking about numerology in the sense that there's meaning in numbers, it's true. But you can take any kind of discipline and you can make a hoax out of it. Like astrology will be the kind of the morning newspaper with 12 hits and what's going to happen to you during the day, and that's rubbish. And so there's versions of numerology which are ridiculous numbers, and then there's ones which are deeply embedded patterns that you actually find in nature. We take one last question. Etienne. Does everybody here know Etienne? This is Nancy Hannibal's son-in-law, Kizzy's husband. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
You're welcome, Etienne.
First, I want to thank you.
Sure, bro.
For sharing. It's such a pleasure to be in your presence and to hear your wisdom and to be amongst your community. Just wanted to make reference to what I've been experiencing along the lines of a separation and this idea of this illusion of separation.
Brilliant.
I work a lot with middle schoolers and high schoolers in Austin, and I would say just about all of the youth that I work with are suffering from some form of anxiety, stress, depression, low self-esteem, or completely just overachieving but still experiencing some type of void or this feeling of isolation in some way or another, and maybe compensating with this overachievement. And I've been aware of it for years, and it just seems like it's getting more intense. And I guess my question is, would you agree from what you've witnessed in your years that our youth, especially our teenagers, are demonstrating to us or exemplifying to us the how sick and toxic our culture has become, and we're trying to, rather than change our culture and look at what they're teaching us, we're trying to medicate them and drug them so that they'll just be quiet and stop showing us how sick we've become. And I don't know, that's just where I'm at right now.
That's
and a lot of what I try to do is what you've spoken of, this idea of bringing them to the awareness that their thoughts, their feelings, their actions actually help to perpetuate their sense of reality and actually gravitate to them, their experiences in life, to try to give them back some sense of power and responsibility and ownership. But just the question is, is that what's happening?
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight, Seán. I totally agree with you. And so about the kind of the medication, the stuff, the realization that the kids' behavior is not so much a demonstration of their dysfunctionality as much as a condemnation and a criticism of the cultures we've created in our world. And just on the medication stuff, there's a great book, I read it 4 or 5 years ago, called Anatomy of an Epidemic. It's by a guy called Whittaker, who was part of the pharmaceutical industry. He was a scientist who used to set up their experimental protocols to test new drugs. And he got totally disabused by the skullduggery that was going on there. And so there's one statistic that stands out in my mind from reading that book, and it was that the SSRIs were invented, I think, in 1987, and these were the wonder drugs that were going to solve all kinds of anxiety, depression, OCD, everything. Before 1987, there were 16,200 American kids on disability because of mental disorders. 16,200. The SSRIs came in 1987, and by 2007, 20 years down the road, there were 565,000 American kids on disability because of mental disorders, courtesy of the pharmaceutical industry. And so this idea of just drugging people into submission, it's really crazy. It's not going to work. The second part of what you're saying is I totally agree with as well. The kids are prophets. They're coming among us to demonstrate to us the inanity of the models we've created, the medical models, educational models, the political models, the military models, the agricultural models, the educational models, demonstrating the economic models. They are not working. And so it's like these kids are coming in as, in some senses, sacrificial lambs. They're offering their lives and undergoing all kinds of personal suffering in order to demonstrate to the world, this is a crazy world you guys have created. And when enough of them have made enough sacrifices, the changes will happen. And I believe we're on the verge of these kinds of changes. And these kids, in some senses, they're the prophets, they're the avatars that are coming among us. They're not recognized, they're medicated. In former times, we just crucified people. Now we medicate them. So you're absolutely right. The good news is that you cannot stop the movement of spirit. And, some few years down the line, when enough children have volunteered for reincarnation and sacrificed their lives, eventually the adults of the world will wake up and we'll radically change the way we do life on Christ consciousness, and then there will literally be Buddha nature among us. Thank you so much for that insight. Thank you, guys. So let's, before we continue with our Eucharist, let's offer each other a sign of our peace.